Rose, want to sit in the front? Mr. Barbie, would you want to go, or do you want to sit in the front? Like that? Or not me? We'll be fine. Oh, you can sit here. Either one is fine. Okay, so you can start whenever you want. It should be.
It's on already. Yeah. Hi. Hello and welcome to. Thanks for those of you who braved the traffic and the Pope's obstructions. I don't know how much of an introduction this man needs, but I will give him. This is Wu'er Kaixi, who, as you may recall, was the dashing student radical who was one of the student leaders at Tiananmen Square. And he is still dashing and still a rebel. He is now living in Taiwan, very actively involved in politics, still taking on Beijing, giving Beijing a headache. And we're going to talk about some of the current events, the visit of President Xi Jinping to the US, the situation with dissidents in the mainland, Taiwan's politics, and a little bit of Xinjiang, where Kaixi is an ethnic Uighur from Urumqi, the capital of the so-called Xinjiang as an autonomous region. And there are quite a few issues there. By the way, I'm Barbara Demick. I was the LA Times bureau chief in Beijing until last year for about 7 years. I think we were starting with what brings you here to the US? What business are you on? What message are you trying to convey?
Well, I was invited by a group of supporters in my campaign to come over and give a speech. However, that invitation has been standing, and I decided to take this particular day to come. Of course, have something to do with Xi Jinping's visit, and I believe there is an urgent need to get the message across to American government, American State Department, particularly America, and most importantly, American people, that this visit, this summit, this lending of legitimacy from the United States to Xi Jinping is it's a very wrong message that the US is sending. And the Chinese government is at war with its own people now. Chinese government is in war with Uighur, Tibetan, Hong Kong people. I didn't really, especially with the majority Chinese people inside China, who have tens of thousands of the Chinese people who goes on appealing to the Chinese regime, and they got oppressed. They have one of the highest political prisoners numbers incarcerated, and then prisoners of consciousness incarcerated in the government in China. Chinese government is at war with its own people. That's the conclusion we have. And the United States is taking a wrong side in this war. And then I think that need to be said, especially the night before President Obama is having this meeting with Xi Jinping tomorrow.
Have you seen in recent years just the U.S. sliding backwards in terms of its ability and desire to press China on human rights?
United States is a democratic country. You have people's elected representatives, you have intelligentsia, you have media. The human rights issue, universal value, democracy, freedom, these are the issues people care here. And then people elect their officials, then it is a public opinion, it is always in a public opinion poll. So the American government have to tell their constituents that they care about those issues too. So every time when American government send a delegation to China, they come back and report, yes, we did raise the human rights question, the issue. We raise that with the China every time we meet with Chinese regime. The problem is, United States raised the question, never wait for an answer. that send a even wronger message. Well, we can basically imagine what the message it can send to Chinese people and Chinese government. We America don't care about human rights. That's the message that the U.S. has been sending to China. Go ahead, do the oppression. All we need is the contract, is the access to your market. And then when China stands stronger, U.S. back off. That's the most unfortunate situation. And Xi Jinping has been acting as a tyrant, worse, only second to Mao Zedong in the last 6 decades. And when China decided to carry on their agenda in their own term, by the way, completely neglect the rule of the game that the whole world follows. The U.S. was forced into taking the Chinese term, obliging to the rule of the game that Chinese government demands. And then I report to you now, I tell you honestly, I promise you now, that rule of game is in the conflict of interest of United States, U.S. government and U.S. people. So the United States have been cutting slack to the Chinese government since, I would say, go way back from Carter era, maybe even track back to Kissinger, the China policy. And that China policy have made the mastermind very fabulously rich. Dr. Kissinger, he himself welcomed Xi Jinping in Seattle, I think yesterday, have become, reported by the foreign policy, have become fabulously rich by introducing American CEOs to Chinese leaders. And then teach them how to conduct business, which is how to appease China's economic policy. And that policy, that China economic policy, is in conflict with American interests. So basically, Kissinger has been teaching American business people how to work with Chinese government to damage American interest. And then for some reason, the United States State Department seems to feel so strongly obliged to follow the former leaders set up blueprint. It's been 40 years. And the United States is so hung up to this idea of, like when it comes to cross-strait relation with Taiwan, they are so hung up with this idea of remaining the status quo. That status quo is 40 years old status quo. It's wrong. It's against the will of Taiwan. It's against democratic principles. Most of all, it's obsolete. Just like Dr. Kissinger, other than making money, he should have no authority to guiding America on its foreign policy. However, that is unfortunately still the case.
As I said, I don't want to talk too much about Kissinger because he's
yes, he should be irrelevant.
Actually, I find Wu'er Kaixi's story very interesting. I think most of you know, maybe don't know. You left China. Was it in 1989 or afterwards?
Right after.
You tell us a little bit about how you got out, and then remarkably, you made many attempts to go back to China, to the point of trying to get yourself arrested.
Yes.
Wu'er Kaixi's parents are in Urumqi still. You haven't seen them since '89 or before then.
Since 19.
And can you tell us a little bit about how you tried to go back to China?
Yes, after the Tiananmen massacre, I was listed as #2 on the Chinese most wanted students, and ever since that, I have been in exile. And ever since then, my parents were also being prohibited from traveling abroad. So my parents have been punished for nothing they have done. They have been punished for me. I could not think of any other words to describe this kind of a government behavior other than barbaric, primitive, perhaps, you know. And then even the Chinese government themselves have declared that they will no longer conduct such kind of brutality that was seen only during the Cultural Revolution, as implement one person to his family. So I haven't seen my parents for 25, 26 years now. In the last 5 years, I have made 4 attempts to turn myself in to Chinese regime. And then each time when I do, the first time was in Macau, second time is in Japan, China, when I tried to charge into Chinese embassy in Tokyo. And then the third time here in Washington, DC, I rang the bell during the office hours, called them, and then they decided to shut all the doors and even the window curtains. The first time in Hong Kong, I landed in Hong Kong, turned myself into the Hong Kong authority, and I said, well, one China, two system, perhaps this is a time for you to find helping the central government extradite most wanted criminal should definitely fall into that one China category. But no, the Hong Kong government decided, following whoever's directive, have repatriate me back to Taiwan. I could not even turn myself in Hong Kong. And then in all 4 attempts, and then I said, you know, these attempts I want to have made is to see my parents, even if it has to take place in a term of prison visit. I know if I go back to China being the most wanted, I will face trial, and then perhaps most likely will face prison times. But at least then my parents can visit me in prison, so I can meet my parents if it is behind the wall.
The last time you tried to go back to China, I mean, were you optimistic at that point that things may have changed and that the atmosphere might be more relaxed 25 years after Tiananmen Square? And you know, I'll mention I plead guilty on this. I was one of the journalists before Xi Jinping came to be General Secretary of the Communist Party, who was very optimistic. People were saying, you know, there'll be time for, you know, a more open discussion of Tiananmen Square in 1989. He's going to change things. Did you share that optimism?
Not at all. Every time there is a regime shift, it's not like a power shift or changing the regime. It's just it's just systematic changing the figurehead of the Communist Party. It is still a Communist Party. But every time when that happened, it seems very overwhelmingly promising to the foreign observers, like, oh, something is changing because we so much want that to happen in China. We want change to happen. Even the change of the figurehead of the Communist Party somehow triggered that kind of wishful thinking. And there is nothing else but using that term to describe that. It's a wishful thinking. We have such a strong wish that China can be changed, but we need to know is the system itself put Xi Jinping there. So the system gave him the first priority of his task is to protect integrity, protect the stronghold of the power of the Chinese Communist Party. So he has to do that. And by doing that, he needs to oppress dissent in China. He needs to be a communist tyrant. So I did never share any of those optimism. And then I really want to bring this up then I want journalists to write about this. Every time I hear people come to me and say, maybe, you know, nowadays it's much more freer in Beijing. People, taxi drivers in the riding a taxi driving can openly criticize the government. Well, I say yes, they can criticize criticize their government while the door of the taxi is shut. And then when he steps out of that taxi, he will be as silent as any other dissident who were silenced and or thrown into prison. So the government may have a better technique in controlling people, does not necessarily go like what they did during the Cultural Revolution time, but that doesn't mean they do not, they don't oppress people's freedom. And China actually has reached the highest number of the prisoner of consciousness under Xi Jinping's era. China is in the worst time since Mao Zedong, since Cultural Revolution nowadays, and that should be a wake-up call for the foreign wishful thinkings, and then that should particularly, especially be a wake-up call for the United States State Department. Change your China policy before it is too late, before it comes to harm you. China, we often say the threat of China is far away, and then we decide to change the term and say, well, China is perhaps around the corner. China is in your living room now.
Well, speaking of your living room, you live in Taiwan now. China is not far away, and with closer economic ties between Taiwan and China, do you see the space for free speech narrowing in Taiwan? Has it affected you?
Yes, absolutely. China, let's look at what happened in Hong Kong, and that will give us a clear answer what's going to happen in Taiwan. China tried to seize control of Hong Kong by purchasing the influence of the money-loaded elites in Hong Kong. Those elites, once they call themselves with a few English letters patching to their names, Knight of British Empire or something, KBE or something like that, and then they call their company Royal or something, and then later on, now they decide to change that into Patriot something. They will go to Beijing, and Beijing realize that they can do what the former colonizer have done, and then they can do that in Hong Kong, and they have successfully done that for quite a long time. And by doing that, they have flooded Hong Kong with the looted money. The corrupted officials of Beijing flooded Hong Kong with looted money, and then they have threatened the intelligentsia and the media, and then to conduct the censorship where in absence of the central propaganda ministry in Hong Kong. They have made the house unaffordable for Hong Kong people. The result is that the umbrella revolution. That Chinese government see that as a successful model. They are copying that model in Taiwan these days. It is impossible for Chinese government to purchase the mind and heart of Taiwanese people. They have learned that. But they think they are still being able to purchase the mouthpiece in Taiwan. They are trying to get the pro-Beijing business tycoons to go back to Taiwan and buy the medias. And then also they try to control the Taiwanese media owners by threatening them of shutting the China market. And for instance, I was one of the most celebrated political commentator for a long time. I was one of the highest paid political commentator on TV for years. And then in the last few years, I was denied by most TV stations in Taiwan. And then they told me the reason. They have to sell their TV dramas in China, and Chinese government would clearly tell them, don't book Wu'er Kaixi on your TV talk show. And then that is a direct interference in the freedom of express in Taiwan, and quite successfully, without Taiwanese people knowing so clearly. It sounds like I'm reporting a personal tragedy to you now, but it is not. I'm telling you, the Chinese government have an agenda, and then they have their own method to go through to accomplish that agenda. They believe they call it historic imperatives. And with when they try to reach that agenda, they will not stop until it is reached. And the Chinese government cannot be negotiated on. Being nice to China does not make China nicer.
This is interesting. It's sort of the same strategy they've used with Bloomberg and the New York Times and Wall Street Journal,
yes,
controlling the media. With
Chinese also have another technique is like using the border to control people. They use their border, for instance, they deny issuing passport to my parents, to many ethnic minorities, to have them to call them into their submission. They also use visa issuance to control foreign media. If you want to have a Beijing bureau, you need to, you know this better than I do, many of the visa issues were based on the political decisions. So the Chinese government used their own borders, used their own like visa and passport issuance, holding their own people hostage. Again, I feel this is almost insulting to report to you in this room the human rights situation of China. I'm telling you how bad the human rights situation, how bad the Chinese Communist Party is, how bad how primitive, barbaric, brutal the Chinese government have been conducting their oppression. I feel keep reporting this to you is an insult to you, but I have been doing this in the last 20 some years with little effect. What does that say? It says something is wrong. Something like US-China policy is an insult to you too.
You're now running for public office in Taiwan. Does that mean you've kind of given up on returning to China?
No.
To making a difference that way? Or?
No, of course not. Well, I naturalized to become a Taiwan resident, okay, because it's a very interesting situation. We don't naturalize to become Taiwan citizen, being a mainlander, because we are automatically Taiwan, the citizens of Republic of China, according to the Constitution. Taiwan still follows today. And then the Taiwanese citizens, people who live in Taiwan, are also automatically the citizens of the People's Republic of China, according to the Constitution Beijing follows. So, but I became a Taiwan resident and then gained my political rights, being to run and to vote and to run in a Taiwan public political life 15 years ago. So I can say I naturalized to become a full Taiwan citizenship by choice. That does not mean I have given up my Chinese identity, nor my Uighur identity. Maybe one day there I can see the Xinjiang Uighur Autonomous Region under democracy, under the referendum, under the democratic process, become Eastern Turkestan Republic again. Then I will be happy to celebrate my, dual, triple citizenship. And then I think one has conflict with another. When you set the principle clear, my principle, my standard is clear, that is freedom. So that is democracy. For instance, if my role, my identity being a Taiwanese, it's in conflict with my identity with Chinese, which side to pick? There's the standard for me to guide me making that decision is which decision will be promoting freedom and democracy. So no, I don't see any conflicts there. Although making a decision to run for public office make you commit to your a certain period of time in your life to certain tasks. So at least once I got elected, I will be committed to live and fight for Taiwanese people for the next 4 years.
Okay. This is a conversation, and
Yes.
there's not so many of you, so let's converse. Any questions? Where's the mic?
Oh, use the one that's just.
What do you think of the IFC awarding the Winter Olympics to China?
When year 2000, when the IOC was in the debate of the year 2000 Olympic, of course, the sentiment in China at that time, people were hoping like the first time we can host Olympics is something kind of a national pride thing. But, and then also let's bear in mind that China at that time is not a free society with free flow of information and debate, criticisms of policies. Still, even by then, a lot of our friends in Beijing said, "How? Of course, Beijing should not win the bid." The people inside Beijing said that, and then the answer, the following statement is even more remarkable. It says that will be issuing a license for Beijing to do whatever they want prior to the Olympic Games. In year 2000, they won the bid for year 2008, and then that has been the case prior to Olympics Games in the summer of 2008. The Chinese government feel like they have a license to conduct more atrocity in China without international scrutiny and pressure. Because, hey, the Chinese government will cut them a slack too and say, this is for the national pride. So giving any authoritarian, totalitarian regime a bit to conduct national games, inclusive, like an opportunity to glorify the nation, is no difference to giving the bid to Hitler's Berlin in 1930s, the Olympic to Hitler's Berlin. So I wish the IOC can always consider the human rights situation whenever they are making that kind of a decision in future.
I'm not sure the microphone is necessary, but from a practical, my name is June Lawrence. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg. From a practical standpoint, where would you start in terms of changing U.S. policy? And from a realistic standpoint, I might say, Robert, where would you start in terms of changing U.S. policy towards China?
Well, let's first begin with linking human rights with trade. Clinton started to delete that, and then actually, I would say maybe Senior Bush, when after 1989, when Tiananmen, right after Tiananmen, when the world is in green on the sanction, the American decided, no, we're going to cut them a slack. If at that time Senior Bush, excuse me, have made a different decision, perhaps we'll see a much freer China today. And then Clinton's delinking human rights with most favored nation also nurtured Beijing into a stronger regime. And nowadays, I think there are many different fronts you can keep doing, although it is a little too late. In one of the agenda, I think, is Taiwan issue, and then where Chinese people think it's a very important U.S.-Sino relation issue, and the Chinese government certainly claims so. And then I agree, Taiwan issue is one of the most important issues that the United States should look into next, where Taiwan is under threat being the next Hong Kong. And then one of my proposal for Hong Kong, for Taiwan is to consider is to amend Taiwan's constitution to officially recognize People's Republic of China. The whole, so basically breaking the one China status quo. And then as I criticized earlier, that one China status quo was established by Kissinger. But of course, they can always blame Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek, like they were the two orchestrated the two constitution that states that. But U.S. has been the one enforcing it. U.S. has been the one government making sure the two sides stay in that status, in that kind of a standoff. But Taiwan is not democracy. Taiwan has its own people's will, and then Taiwan has passed the referendum law about a decade ago. So my proposal is clear. If Taiwan decided to change the status quo, United States get on side, in the right side, to go with Taiwan. Well, no, actually, Taiwan will be following the United States if we decide to go on the law level, on the constitutional level, to recognize People's Republic of China. We will be following U.S. because the whole one China thing started from Jimmy Carter recognizing People's Republic of China. So U.S. has been playing I could not find the right word, but being a bouncer for China, basically. And enforcing China's, when it comes to China-Taiwan relation. Why would the United States have to do that? I have no logical answer for that other than Kissinger still has a great influence in the State Department. I know you don't want to talk about it, but other than that, I just don't see the logic for the State Department following a 40 years old, clearly, obviously obsolete China policy when it comes to Taiwan. And let's forget about Kissinger. Let's just state it clear. It is against the will of Taiwan's people, and it is against it's against the principle of democracy. So United States is in obligation to follow Taiwan's change if Taiwan decided to change its relation with China. If it is Taiwan's will, if it is processed in a democratic procedure. And then I do not think threatening Taiwan, which the United States have been doing, should be neglected by American public and American media.
You know, the Chinese government has been madly arresting.
Why don't you identify yourself? Although we all know you.
Yeah, you know others. My name is Rose Tang. I used to be a journalist for 12 years, and then we were colleagues at Princeton University. A few years ago, now I'm a human rights activist in New York, causing trouble to the Chinese government. So the Chinese government actually...
Soon be in Hong Kong.
The Chinese government has been madly arresting human rights lawyers by hundreds since the 9th of July. And more than a dozen of them are still in detention. And the mass of arrest is unprecedented. And it started with really years ago, like torturing and jailing the most prominent human rights lawyer, Gao Zhisheng. And now he just revealed he was severely tortured during his imprisonment. And his wife, Geng He, has refused an invitation from the State Department yesterday to show up for a meeting. What's your comment on that?
Gao Zhisheng's interview reported by Associated Press, his comments is very moving comments. And then when I read the report, I was very touched, and I was very moved, I feel very sad to learn the fact that during the time he's in prison. By the way, when Gao Zhisheng was detained, the Chinese authority decided simply give no answer to the government's, to the family's inquiry of whereabouts of him. He's disappeared. He wasn't even given a notice to the family of his arrest.
Which is required under
Chinese own law, yes. And then and then of course, Chinese own law also prohibits torturing and inhumane treatment in the prison. Of course, we all know, and we are so used to the Chinese government breaking its own law. We're so used to its act of atrocity. We are so used to absurdity of the Chinese government. We take it as granted. We take it as it was presented. No matter how much we are used to an absurdity, we should never forget it is absurdity nevertheless. It is absurdity after all. But to this level, when we learn from Gao Zhisheng's interview, we are still stunned by the barbaric capability of the Chinese government to be this brutal, this barbaric. Then Gao Zhisheng said, beautifully, every time a dissident emerged from prison alive, is declaring of a victory against the regime. From learning that, we know the Chinese government wants to break him. And then when he would emerge from prison last year, he couldn't complete a sensible sentence. And he was in a very bad physical shape too. And then we were at that time, the dissident community, we were at that time was so sad. We thought that one of our fellow dissidents were beaten, were taken, were broken by the regime. That happens from time to time, but it certainly did not happen to Gao Zhisheng. He emerged not only from prison, but also from the conspiracy of the Chinese government trying to break people at a mental level. And then also the will of a dissident should inspire us today. I think the tyranny called people to their will by people's love of the peace. But also, they should know that same love of peace from the people will give birth to bravery that will eventually defeat that tyranny.
I'll just interrupt this for a second. Have you seen many of your fellow dissidents sort of lose faith in the cause? You can give up, go start high-tech businesses, leave political activism.
Well, I don't see that as a betrayal of what we believe. Well, we believe in democracy and freedom. That the fundamental element of democracy and freedom is an individual have the right to pursue his own life, whatever that is. And then being a dissident, we have fulfilled and we have conducted more than average citizen's duty. And each and every citizen have his own duty, and I think we did. We paid our due. Many of us have already paid our due, but it is so when if they decide to move on with their life, I do not see any person other than him or herself can have a criticism over that. Well, to me, it's not just responsibility. Sometimes it's a destiny, it's a call, and then it's unfinished business to me.
You mentioned that you've felt some pressure in Taiwan in recent years. Can you speak the way you speak in New York, in Taipei? And when you speak, do people listen, or have they gotten tired of the message? And can you be more specific about the kinds of pressure applied by the Chinese to stifle free speech? I know a lot of the measures are very subtle and that they move slowly, but
yes,
they seem to be moving.
Yeah, well, relatively speaking, Taiwan is still much more freer than China, of course, perhaps even more than Hong Kong. But when we have a saying in Chinese, I don't know, I'm sure there is an equivalent. They say in Chinese, it's you use warm water to boil the frog, so the frog does not jump out of the wok.
Cold water, 冷水煮青蛙，怎么是用热水？
温水煮青蛙。
温水。
So
turn up the heat gradually.
yes. So the freedom can be bleeding away without our conscience, and then therefore, in the years living in Taiwan, I have been shouting to my Taiwan fellow citizens to be cautious about the bleeding out of the freedom. And then, unfortunately, Communist Party is quite sophisticated when it comes to Taiwan politics. We have a very similar situation, political situation in Taiwan, just like the United States. It's a very, very politically plural society. And so people will not be as cautious as one of their opponents, and political opponents were let's say, coerced into, by the Chinese government into giving up their free opinion. For instance, if a Taiwanese businessman who was previously pro-Taiwan independent could not conduct business anymore in China because the Chinese government decided to support the other side, then the Taiwanese businessman was coerced into changing his verdict on the issue. And the Taiwanese people do not realize one of the fellow citizens of Taiwan has been coerced. They feel it's a political opinion issue, it's where you stand. It shouldn't matter where you stand. It should matter that you should be able to have that stance. Things like that is happening gradually, slowly in Taiwan. As I described, the TV stations in Taiwan were told not to broadcast certain topics if they still want to sell their soap operas in China. Things like that. And then the Taiwan's freedom of press, freedom of press for a long time has been a leader in East Asia. Unfortunately, that situation is changing. We still have freedom of expression. I worry that may have changed too. And people will start self-censorship, and then that will be the end of democracy. As a fellow democracy, United States have an obligation, have a duty to protect Taiwan's democracy.
Anybody else? The Chinese economy has been rather weak in recent months. Do you see that the weakness of the Chinese economy giving more space in Taiwan? How much is Taiwan's dependence on the mainland economy a factor in stifling free speech?
Yeah. That is, you would think since the Chinese regime largely depends on economic growth of China to maintain its legitimacy, the disturbance in the let's say stock market or Taiwan's economic growth should have shaken the central regime's policy towards its people. It may have shaken the legitimacy of Chinese people, of the Chinese regime. Chinese people have stronger doubt to Xi Jinping's regime. However, that did not change the method of the communist China when it comes to oppression. In fact, if it has changed, it just made it worse. The Chinese government decided to strengthen their oppression in the time of economic disturbance. That tells us they decide to follow their agenda to the end. And then that tells us there's no way to negotiate with China. It tells us being nice to China does not make China nicer. It also tells us the rule of the game we follow, the economic link that we have hoped that can eventually make China more open and more democratic, has failed. We need to come and realize sooner or later, usually sooner is always better than later, a red line should be drawn, and then the step should be taken. And before the expansion of China's ambition threaten to China, U.S. interest and U.S. core value.
What do you think Beijing's timeline is with regard to Taiwan? Have they mapped out this game?
50 years. That's what Deng Xiaoping said, and Xi Jinping clearly disagreed. Xi Jinping said the Taiwan issue is a legacy left by the first generation, and he considered himself the second generation. So Mao and Deng is the first, I guess, and then Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao is what, in between? And he himself and the other princelings consider themselves as the state. He used the term red second generation, Hong Er Dai. He said in open speaking, he says Taiwan issue should be resolved within their time being. So I think Xi Jinping wants to see Taiwan's issue settled within the next 7 years of his time.
Why do you think young Taiwanese are not concerned? You see, so much activity in Hong Kong, especially among the young.
Yes.
You don't see any
I see.
of that in Taiwan. Are they just passive, asleep?
No, I think young Taiwanese people are very much concerned of the issue. We had a student-led social movement in year 2014, so it's called Sunflower Movement, and then that has fundamentally changed the political scene in Taiwan. Before that, the so-called unification and the independence issue seems to be occupying people's mind and say which way we pick. After the 2014 student-led demonstration, I think the idea for Taiwanese people, 23 million Taiwanese people, are quite clear. The unification with China has been ruled out of an option. So then I think young Taiwanese people are very clear about the choice. They are perhaps not quite clear on how to reach how to achieve, how to accomplish that choice that they have. For that, I think it shouldn't just be their task. It's our task too. Again, I want to reiterate my position. I think having a constitution amendment of officially recognizing People's Republic of China can be a first move, and it's democratic, and it's agreeing with Taiwan's public view on this issue and public will too. And then actually also go accordance to both political parties. Which is one issue that we never thought we should raise, and that we never thought that can make a difference. Why we didn't think it could make a difference? Because again, the United States has been taking a wrong side when it comes to cross-strait. United States-led Western democracies have been taking a wrong side when it comes to cross-strait relations, and then Taiwan has felt we are abandoned. We are left alone. We are betrayed by the fellow democracies. But don't worry, we are democracy, so we can prevail by ourselves. So we have a law of referendum. We have the people's will as our weapon, as our supporting force. So I just hope when that happens, again, I urge the United States-led democracies take the side of the obvious choice, the democracy side.
One more question.
Hello, Mr. Wu'er Kaixi. My name is Yi, and I am a student from mainland China. As we know that the Chinese government is restricting its Muslim population practice of religion and access to passports to travel abroad, including for the pilgrimage. And in 2011, I was almost arrested by the Nanjing local police for being engaged in some Muslim students and worship outside campus. So my question is that what's your comment on the Chinese policies on the Muslim and the Islam religion, and what advice do you have for us? Thank you.
Thank you. First, my commendation for your brave activities. Also the open letter. Mr. Yi is the one person who wrote the open letters urging the young Chinese students to have an honest opinion, honest and a brave outlook for the Tiananmen incident. Thank you for that. To answer your question, Chinese Communist Party claim, of course, within its own constitution, that the people of China has freedom of religion. And we all know that's just another lie. We just get used to Chinese government lying, we often forget to point out you are lying. When it comes to religion, it's not just one of those common lies they put in constitution. They feel the threat of a different belief, because belief gives people power. I think the Communist Party want the whole country fall into an atheist state, that everybody worship only money. That's what the Chinese governments want. So if that happens, they can be point at people and say, we can provide you with prosperity and future and economically. So with that, they have their legitimacy. And then that's why they have systematically destroyed an ancient country's value system in the last 20, 30 years. In the last 2-3 decades, Chinese have became a very decadent society when it comes to value and faith, which is extremely unfortunate, and we don't know how long it will take for China to repair itself. I think it's before we talk about Muslim, we also need to address some Tibetan issue. Of course, the Tibetan people, mostly Buddhists, they are very pacifist people. The strongest form of their struggle has been self-immolation. And if in an honest world, one self-immolation will awaken the whole world. But today's world is so dishonest. 140 body counts did not do the job. Uighur people, other Muslim peoples in China, we don't have the custom of self-immolation, which is a Buddhist form of sacrifice. But I think the desperation is the same. And then as I said, religions give people strength, even in desperation. So when the attack in Kunming train station or Urumqi train station happens, I was asked by many netizens and people knowing that I'm Uighur, do I subscribe to the view of Uighur people? Do I agree with violence? And then do I think what Uighur people committed in those incidents are terrorist acts? Well, let me reiterate. In 1989, I have decided, following my mentor Liu Xiaobo's clear instruction, to take the side of being a non-violent, and that has been my life's guideline. And then I do not subscribe violence is the only path for Uyghur people to fight for its freedom. However, I do not have a better answer for my Uyghur fellow Uyghur people. What will be a better path? What will be a better mean? Petition, we have done that. Lobbying, we have done that. in a more honest world, our problem will be recognized and being addressed on. Again, this is not that honest world we live in. And then when people ask, do I think Uyghur people have conducted a terrorist act? I say clearly, if you define the terrorist act as killing or harming innocent people to establish fear, Chinese Communist Party have been doing that for 6 decades in Xinjiang, in Tibet. So take a side again. To my Uighur people, to Muslims in China, when they were forced to when they were deprived their rights to practice their believed form or their belief. I feel the pain, and then I feel the old legitimacy for them to fight against the Chinese government. And then I do again urge here today in the United States, and then to the people, to American people, for the good God-believing American people, to have a sympathy, to have empathy on what kind of situation China is and what kind of policy your government is conducting, and what kind of message it is sending to the Chinese government, who is oppressing religious practitioners. And then also, I think Falun Gong needs to be mentioned. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. I think that pretty much wraps it up on a strong closing.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Wu'er Kaixi. I'm Patricia Kranz, the Executive Director of the Overseas Press Club. So thank you all for coming. There's our newsletter out there, applications, other information about events, and our Dateline magazine, which talks about all the awards we gave last year. So please feel free to take some information. Thank you.
Thank you very much again. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. There is a Wi-Fi supporters here from my connection, actually mainly from mainland Chinese. I want to ask about Taiwan.
Thank you.